So this class is about human-centered stories, which very basically means not forgetting to keep the human at the center of your story, which is sometimes done when we're storytelling. The key is to remember to try to tease out someone's humanity, not to put them in a box of this person's good, this person's bad, the story is this, but to remember that actually people are very nuanced and complicated and messy. And if you can really weave a story together that discusses all those complications and tries to understand the human being at the center, I think you can have some really great success in storytelling. You make it riveting for your listener. There's never a downside in being able to interview people, which is sort of a version of just talking to people and listening to people. Really, it literally is just listening to people. I think social media managers who are trying to transmit and tell the story of their company are talking to employees in the company to talk about, a company is its employees, right? It's what it builds, what it creates, and who it hires. If you're trying to tell the story of your company, you're telling the story of who works here, and here's the good we do in the world. That's basic storytelling. You have to be able to talk to people. If you're a social media manager, you, I'm sure, are talking to people every single day about the company. Why do they use the product? Why do they enjoy working there? And listen, it's in some ways it's an easy skill, I think, but it takes time to get the hang of it. I know I am dragged across the country to interview people all the time. These are often companies that are full of very competent people who could do interviews, but there is a skill to it. It's not, you have to hone that skill over time. The interesting thing about the world today is people have such finely honed bullshit detectors that if you're trying to pitch a story that is not authentic, not only will people laugh you out of the room, they'll come back to you with 25 stories proving the exact opposite of what you're trying to pitch. So I think for corporations, the really key thing is not only tell a story, but make sure that story is an authentic story. It has to be real, or that's problematic. And the same thing, frankly, in journalism or any kind of storytelling. It can't just be, we found this one person. I think it has to have a sense of that this is true. It's why in journalism we use data to undergird the stories that we're telling. So I think it's similar for whether you're doing journalistic storytelling or storytelling around a company's mission, whether that company is a massive corporation or you're an entrepreneur starting a small company. You got to get to the heart of what is true, what is the real authentic story. There's a path to getting somewhere, and you have to authentically follow somebody's path. Most people's path is not, I started here and it all went very smoothly to here. Usually there's some starts and stops and fits and things don't work. That's just real life. Again, I think it's back to being very authentic. The way it usually works is that it doesn't work perfectly all the time, that there are some challenges. I think it's important to capture those challenges, again, because you're telling a real story about real people. As I tell people all the time, God is in the details, right? God is in the details, and there's a reason that is a famous saying, because God is in the details. The details are what will bring a person to life. So for me, I think the data points have always been critical. I think in journalism, you have to have a why are we doing this story? It can't just be I'm doing a story on this thing I thought was interesting. It has to be it's interesting to me because, here's why it matters that you spend the next 5, 10, 60, 75 minutes watching this. We've always undergirded our work with data to give context and help build understanding. Not everybody does. I think sometimes people just do, here's a guy who's just, wacky, and they're an interesting character, and we'll follow them. But most cases, things that I find interesting, I think there's some kind of context given. So I think context is very, very critical. I think at a time where people doubt facts, it also really helps to make it clear that this character-driven story exists in reality. It helps give a sense that this person fits into a bigger context, a bigger narrative, that they don't just exist alone as a personal story, but they're part of something. And I think that's pretty important. I think asset framing versus deficit framing has to be something that you're just thinking about all the time. I see it constantly, and often when we talk about communities of color where people are poor, we frame them as a deficit. We frame them as a compilation of all the dysfunction in their life. So we did a documentary, Black in America documentary, around a young woman named Glorious Menifee who was going off to college, and we followed her story. I remember arguing with our producer who used a bit of a shorthand to describe her. Glorious's mother is a crack addict. Glorious's father is an alcoholic. Well, first of all, those are not descriptors of Glorious at all. Those are descriptors of a dysfunctional family. Those things are true, but if you're looking for a description of Glorious, you actually have to go into the details. The way to tell Glorious's story better, is to talk about Glorious starting for the lacrosse team. And Glorious is a B student, and Glorious is a peer mentor, and this is who she is, and this is where she lives, and these are her dreams and her goals and her aspirations. And yes, she has two parents whose struggles have messed up her life in a lot of ways. But knowing all those details, now we care more about Glorious, and we want to see her succeed. So at the end of the doc, when we see her get into college and burst into tears, and as she says, now I can finally get out, we understand Glorious. She wasn't this shorthand about failure and dysfunction. You don't have any emotional sense of that. I think detail is what makes a person real and whole, and not just a shorthand version of wink, wink, you know what I'm talking about. Black girl, inner city.